Dialectical behavior therapy was created in the 1980s by Marsha Linehan in Seattle, Washington.
Today, DBT is taught all over the world.
We're two therapists who believe everyone can benefit from DBT skills.
I'm Kate.
I'm Michelle.
And this is DBT and Me.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
It's Q&A 29.
29?
Wow.
Wow, it's almost into its 30s. Time for their midlife crisis. I don't know. Yeah.
Would that still be maybe a quarter life crisis?
That's true.
Perhaps?
That's true. I guess midlife is now like 45-ish?
Yeah. Yeah. I would
Fair
say you
enough.
definitely have to be past 40 for a midlife crisis. So
Okay.
Q&A wise, we have a little ways to go till our Q&As get to a midlife crisis stage.
Sorry,
Anyways.
I do weird things. It's like my going barefoot turned 21 this year, so I poured a shot of alcohol over my bare feet. I get weird about things.
There you go. And as a disclaimer, I don't know, I feel the need to say it anyway. So Kate and I normally record in the morning, but we are currently recording this Q&A for you guys in the evening after we
8:45
just got
at night.
done leading a DBT group for 2 hours. So
True.
if we seem a little like punchy or I don't know, in weird moods, we're both a little tired, but we wanted to get this done.
I mean, if we're owning that, we might as well also own that we both woke up at obscene times, so yours is worse. Though you also probably fell
Yes.
asleep before I did.
Yes, woke up to go to the bathroom this morning because, you know, this is a thing you do when you're pregnant, and I just never went back to sleep, and that was around 3:30 in the morning. So.
And my cats started yowling like they were dying at about 4:40 this morning myself, so.
Yeah.
Yay, feline friends. Okay. Now that we've owned the fact that we're weird, let's go.
Yes, let's dive in.
All right, so first one reads, I've been avoiding facing my own issues for almost my entire life, and now, at almost 40, I'm realizing for the first time that I can no longer ignore the trauma I've experienced and in turn allowed to cause more trauma for myself and the people I love in my life. I've just begun seeing a therapist and feel once a week is not enough to tackle my deep-rooted pain and ugly habits. She suggested PHP, which stands for Partial Hospitalization Program, and I'm awaiting approval for the program. I don't have any formal diagnosis or recommendation for treatment to help me with my issues, but I feel that DBT can help me with the anxiety of walking through figuring them out, the feeling of being lost since I don't know or understand why I do the destructive things I do, and the ability to identify and communicate my feelings about all of it. I'm open to all suggestions, advice, direction for using DBT. Where should I start?
Yeah, so there's a lot in this post, I feel like. I mean, the main thing that came up for me is just so much validation for this listener. Because, one, I think it's a big deal to recognize what you need when it comes to your mental health. Or to at least recognize that what you're currently getting isn't making the cut.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times people can sometimes fall into this habit, or not even a habit, that's not what I mean to say, but fall into this way of thinking where they're like, I just have to take what I can get with my mental health. So, you know, okay, sure, I found a therapist, I really like them, but their schedule's really full. They can only see me every other week. I just have to do it. It'll be fine. You know, would really
or even
deep down.
stigmatizing needing more. Like,
Yeah.
oh God, needing more than once a week, that would make me super fucking crazy. I don't want to admit that I
Right.
might need more. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. So to be able to recognize that you do need more, huge and a great place to begin. And also wonderful that your therapist suggested a PHP program. We may have talked about PHP programs before, but essentially it's like really intensive outpatient mental health treatment where you're essentially in, I was about to say some form of therapy, but like you're in this program like 5 days a week, like a job.
Yeah, 5 to
And you're
7.
working on your
There's a
mental
local
health
one around
all
here that's
day.
7. Yep, like 9 to
Wow,
5,
yeah.
7 days a week. Yeah.
Yep,
It's a lot.
exactly. And it's doing group therapy and individual therapy and all this stuff to work on your mental health. So that's great that you're taking that step. Of course, it can be really hard to wait to get into programs like that. Hence, I think why you're writing this is because you're recognizing that you need something to fill in the gap and something to supplement your once weekly therapy sessions. So But that's all amazing. So I don't know. That's just where my brain went first. It's like, good for you. You're doing it. The other thing that came up, right? Because of course you're specifically asking about DBT, and you say like, I feel that DBT can help me, and I hope that DBT can help you too, right? Kate and I do this podcast because we believe that DBT skills can be helpful for nearly everyone for so many different reasons. You don't have to pigeonhole yourself into a certain diagnosis or anything like that to benefit from DBT. This is just good stuff for life in general. That having been said, I don't want you to get your hopes up for what DBT can do. Like, I want you to go into learning and using DBT skills with realistic expectations. And you start off with talking about, like, I'm realizing for the first time that I can no longer ignore the trauma I've experienced in my life, right? You're talking about trauma. And we've talked about this before. DBT is not designed to treat trauma. So it doesn't mean it can't be helpful. DBT can certainly be helpful with anxiety. And you mentioned that. But I kind of was thinking, you know, we did record this episode recently. I'm not sure which episode it was. I think we just called it like PTSD and DBT or something like that.
Yeah, I think so.
DBT skills for PTSD. So even though you don't have a formal PTSD diagnosis, it sounds like you might find some benefit from listening to that episode, being able to pick and pull out certain skills that might apply to things that you experience as a result of the trauma that you've had in your life. So that could be a good place to begin, is listening to that episode. But in general, I mean, you're doing the things. You're here.
Gesundheit.
Thank you. I think that's the first time I've ever sneezed on the podcast.
I think so.
Okay, there we go. I cough a lot. But I think it's one of those things where, like, I mean, you're finding resources like the podcast. And again, there's so many resources out there for DBT. There's workbooks. I mean, there's so many different places to begin. It's just important to kind of pick one place to start and to go from there rather than trying to do all the things at once. That's something that generally Kate and I don't recommend. Just pick something, right? You don't need to go out and buy 5 workbooks.
No.
Pick one, kind of an idea. And I think you're already doing great work with getting started. So
Absolutely.
to pat yourself on the back for that.
So everything Michelle said, and then me being weirdly literal when I read this, I was just like, okay, where to start for using DBT? So that's what came to my mind. And so if you're wanting to tackle DBT and you're wanting to do it sort of in the order that maybe has the best potential for being helpful, considering the things you describe in here, right? In this, I don't know if this was a post or an email, but in this query, considering you talk about the trauma and anxiety and other things, what I would recommend is starting with the mindfulness skills of DBT, in part because of all of the DBT skills, I think that are the absolutely most broadly applicable. You can have anything mental health-wise going wrong or nothing mental health-wise going on, and the mindfulness skills are still pretty powerful, pretty potent for helping life be better. So I would definitely recommend starting there. If you want to branch out after that or keep going after that, sort of in order, considering again, just sort of how you've described the struggles that you're going through, I would recommend then moving on to emotion regulation module skills, then distress tolerance, and probably last the interpersonal effectiveness, in part because it doesn't seem to be the thing that you struggle with the most, and in part because, in my opinion at least, it seems to build the most off of the other two. Like having other three, having those under your belt makes tackling the interpersonal effectiveness stuff, I think, considerably more considerably easier. There you go. That's an English sentence. So yeah, congratulations. Like Michelle said, I think you're doing an amazing job. And if you want to wrap DBT into things, which also, I don't know, I guess I don't know what country you're in, but most partial hospitalization programs I'm aware of, you're going to be getting DBT. So
it's pretty common.
Spoiler alert. In fact, I know somebody who recently went into one, and I thought this was pretty cool. They offer both DBT and RODBT as a part of that program, which I thought was pretty badass. So, yeah, you might be ushered through this anyway.
Yep.
So, yeah. All right. On to the next one, I think, Michelle.
Yeah, next one. This one says, I am trying to rekindle my relationship with my dad, the main epicenter of my trauma, because I feel I could handle it, and I realize he's getting old. I'm really wanting to meet up at my home and have tea so that I may be allowed to express myself emotionally, but he is just refusing point blank unless it is at a cafe. Any advice would be great.
So, before I go into any actual advice, I will own that when Michelle and I were sort of talking our way through these before we started recording...
Different opinions on this one.
Super different. And in seeing how they were different, I thought I ought to probably own my bias was that when I was reading about this person's dad, A, hearing about them being the epicenter of this person's trauma, and B, what sounded like already pushing against boundaries that the writer was trying to set, I got a little bit of, not literal, flashbacks about my mother. I was like, ugh! Right, it made me, like, my shoulders go all tense and me to be like, ugh! So my first reaction was, don't do it! And that's from my own experience and bias. So, I just want to own that that is maybe not at the root of a professional opinion, but rather is where I'm coming from personally. When it comes to actual advice, if you are choosing to try and stand firm about meeting at your house, then the DBT skill that I would first and foremost recommend would, of course, be Dear Man, right? Because that's the best one to use for making a request. And it gives you such a lovely scaffolding, right, to do it in a kind of clear and concise way. So pure skill-wise, Dear Man would be the way that I would lean. And then we actually were just talking about this in the DBT group. Michelle and I were talking about having just led tonight. Mm-hmm. There is what was it? It was Interpersonal Effectiveness Worksheet 3. If any of you happen to have the worksheet books, I don't know. Anyway, it talks about clarifying your priorities in any given situation. And the one is it your objective? So in this writer's, what they say, it would be meeting at my house and not at a cafe. That sounds like that's their main objective. So is getting the objective met your number one priority? The second option is the relationship, right? Is being in service to this relationship. So, you know, as they put it, rekindling this relationship with their dad. Is that the actual top priority in this situation? In which case the skill involved would be give, and the action would probably be giving in and going to the cafe and not making it a point of contention, because that has more chance to harm the relationship than help it. So if the relationship is your top priority, that's the way you'd want to go. And then the third one is self-respect, which would correlate with FAST if we're talking interpersonal effectiveness skills. And I'm not entirely certain what that would look like in this particular instance, because I don't know which way their self-respect would have this person lean, and that's going to be super personal, right? So based on their self-respect and values, I don't know.
I kind of actually feel like they say, where did they say it? So like wanting to meet up at my home and have tea so that I may be allowed to express myself emotionally.
Oh, okay.
If that's the goal.
Maybe that's the self-respect one.
I want to express myself. Like, I want to get this stuff off my chest. Then I totally think FAST would be the skill. If that's your main goal. It's like, I just want to be able to say this stuff to my dad.
So there you go. That's my end of things. Is A, sorry, I'm biased. Let me just own that. And B, I think really figuring out what your priorities will be a great way to guide you towards action.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. So the thoughts that I had, I don't know. I'll try to be brief and I'll try to make sense. Because I totally interpreted when I read this. I love what Kate's talking about here of picking, right? What's most important to you? Like, what do you really want to get out of this interaction? And I just immediately went to this place. Of course, we have no idea anything else about you, listener. We don't know what your relationship with your dad is like, which I'm sure there's a long history there. We don't know anything about him as a person. Like, there's a lot we don't know. But I just went to this place where I'm like, well, the priority seems to be rekindling this relationship. That seems to be the priority. That was my assumption, right? And I think, Kate, you went to this place of like, well, what seems to be really important is these boundaries. And maybe that's it, right? Because we don't know your answer, listener. And actually, It is interesting looking at it now. You mentioned all three.
Yep.
Right? Try to rekindle my relationship. I'm really wanting to meet up at my home. And I want to express myself emotionally. You want it all. But I just assumed the most important one of those three was the rekindling the relationship piece. And again, I could be right, I could be wrong, but if that is... Oh my gosh, did you just see Stu?
Yes!
Weird night, you guys.
What is
Weird
going on?
We're tired.
I guess so. Tired sneezing.
Yep.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it's okay. I sneezed your thing earlier. Or I don't know. I don't know when I sneezed. But, so if that's what you want most, is rekindling the relationship, my first thought was that maybe this is a place to be flexible with where and when and how that looks. If your dad wants to meet up at a cafe, even though that's not your first choice, it might serve the relationship to kind of give a little to get a little in that sense. Okay, he wants to meet up at this cafe. Ugh, I was really hoping we'd meet up at my house. But I just went to this place of like, what if you tell him no? I mean, which you can do, right? You have every right to set that boundary. And to say, I don't want to meet up with you at the cafe. This is why. I really want you to come to my house. Just be aware that your dad may come back and then say, well, too bad. I'm not going to meet with you at your house. And then you guys are kind of at this stalemate.
Loggerheads, yep.
Yep, because he won't come to your house and you won't go to the cafe. And then if your goal is to rekindle the relationship,
a non-starter.
Yeah, it's not, then that goal kind of ends there. So just something to think about in terms of like what, I mean, now I'm really kind of echoing what Kate said, but just like what is most important? Because I almost wondered, and maybe this is there and maybe this isn't there for you. But if there's this clinging to the, I want to meet up at my house and have tea. Like I have this vision in my head for how I want this to go and how I want to make this happen. I sense echoes of willfulness there. I could be wrong. Maybe that isn't what's behind that intention. But sometimes, this is where I'll own my stuff, I could get super willful with how I want things to go. I'm like, I have this plan. I want this plan to be followed. And if other people are like, meh, I don't really like that plan. I'm like, well, screw you. I want the plan anyways. But that doesn't serve my relationships a lot of the time. Like, it serves my relationships to be able to take into consideration, well, what does this other person want? Why do they want what they want? Why do I want what I want? And sometimes there can be a middle ground. Here, I don't know what that middle ground would be. Honestly. Between home and cafe. I don't know. Maybe you guys pick a park. I don't know. Where there's like this third option that you both like, kind of an idea. But I think that, again, if that's what you want is to rekindle your relationship with him, I personally would not recommend getting into a battle about this. That's what I recommend, if that's your priority. Like Kate was saying, if that's not your priority, then by all means, you can stick to your guns. And you could be like, no, I'm prioritizing this. This is what's important to me. This is where I want it to happen. Dad, take it or leave it. And if that would help you to feel really empowered, you can do that. That's okay. If the goal is to rekindle the relationship, I'd go to the cafe.
Yeah, fair enough.
Just saying.
Fair point.
So, yep, those are my thoughts.
Okay, let's see. Next one says, hi guys, does anyone know what techniques, or just give general advice, to use to cope with nightmares? Some of them are PTSD based, some are just extremely vivid and upsetting. I'm trying to work on coping with them afterwards or even during, but I don't really know what to do, and it affects my sleep majorly.
Yeah, so, we've shared this on the podcast before, I believe. Kate and I both write in our notes for Q&As. Sometimes I get to my notes first. Sometimes Kate gets to her notes first. Depending on who writes in their notes first, sometimes that person takes, how would I put it? All the good skills. I'm like, that's everything I would say. Kate kind of took all the good skills for this one. She took all the DBT stuff. Let me put it that way. So definitely listen to what Kate's about to say, but I'm going to sprinkle in some things too that may help. So, first things first, go listen to our episode about sleep. It's called Sleep Special. It's pretty early on in the podcast. That would be a good place to begin if you haven't listened to that episode already. I will talk a little bit, which I might have shared some of this in that sleep episode. I can't remember because it's been a while since we recorded it. But my husband is diagnosed with PTSD, and he, throughout his life, his traumatic event happened when he was 6 years old. He is now 41. So throughout the vast majority of his life, he has had nightmares that are PTSD based. So I will share some of the things that have been helpful for him, and you can decide if they would be helpful for you. Like, these are things that he's worked on with his therapist to hopefully try to prevent the likelihood of a nightmare occurring, or how to intervene if it does. So in terms of trying to prevent the nightmare from occurring, it's so important to make sure that you feel safe when you go to bed. Whatever that means for you. You might need to change some things up about your sleeping environment. Maybe you need to move some furniture around. I don't know if that would apply to your situation or not. Maybe you want to use a nightlight. Maybe you want to listen to music. Maybe you want to use a weighted blanket or change the sheets on your bed. I don't know what that would look like for you, but changing some things in your environment so that your environment feels safer can really help. My husband will do a visualization that's been pretty powerful for him of he imagines a figure that is like a guard. Like, he's kind of come up with what this figure would look like in his head, and he imagines a guard standing at our door. That guard is there to protect any and all bad dreams getting in. Actually works pretty well for him. So maybe that would work for you. I mean, I think Kate and I both are on the same page that visualization can be pretty powerful. Hence why we do guided visualizations for closing moments a lot of the time. Also, one thing that's been helpful for him in terms of jolting him out of the nightmare, because, we sleep together in the same bed, I do this for him. If he's waking up having a nightmare, I have on my bedside table a little vial of mint essential oil. And I open that up because if he's having a really bad nightmare, it wakes me up. I mean, he will be screaming and having a large reaction. I open that up and I put it under his nose. So I don't put the essential oil on him. I just take off the lid and I try to put it as close to his nose as I can. And it is shocking how well that works. He calms back down within about 10 seconds. Like, it really helps him. So this may be hard if you sleep alone, because you may not have your wits about you enough to have that on your own bedside table and reach for it and be able to kind of pull yourself out of your own nightmare in that way. But if you also
I wonder if a
share a bed with someone
or something, like just having it going in the room could be helpful.
Yep. I think that can also really help with that idea of feeling safer. I've heard some people, they put some drops of lavender essential oil on their pillow, and that helps them fall asleep and kind of have restful sleep. So I think there's lots of, again, none of what I'm really talking about is truly what DBT recommends, but these are just all things to consider that might help. So, yeah.
I like
Those are my
it.
thoughts.
Well, and I love that you talk about me talking about DBT skills, because the closest I actually get is to say, look up the nightmare protocol, because we haven't taught
That
it
is
enough for
the
me to
DBT
rattle it
skill.
off, like what it actually is. But it's something that I've turned a lot of clients onto, including ones who have nothing else to do with DBT.
Yeah.
I just have them Google like DBT nightmare protocol, and it comes up. So it's pretty.
And we have it posted in the group.
Oh, yep, in the Facebook group.
Under the guides, find the guide that says sleep special.
And there it is.
Nightmare protocol is there. Yep.
And so a lot of people find it remarkably helpful, especially for, so not all certainly, but a lot of PTSD based nightmares can be repetitive. So you kind of know what it is. And a lot of the nightmare protocol is especially helpful for like recurring thematic nightmares. So first and foremost, I would suggest that. And the other stuff is just similar suggestions for both sort of regulating and changing your mindset before going to bed, which I have found it helpful for myself to meditate like right before bed, and or I like listening to bedtime stories. There is, I think I've recommended this at other times. I will always recommend it. I love this woman. There's a podcast.
Yeah, you said it in the sleep special.
I'm sure I did.
Like the condensed sleep special
that's true.
Here. How we're answering this question.
There's a podcast called Nothing Much Happens: Bedtime Stories for Adults. I won't sing the praises too hard, but I will say it puts me to sleep pretty much anytime I use it, pretty quickly, and like, I don't know, for lack of a better word, gently. And the nice thing is that like you're thinking about something specific as you're going to bed that's unrelated to anything, nightmare related and or just, I don't know, anxiety related, like maybe thinking about your day or the next day might be, right? It gives your brain something to chew on that's calm and calming and gentle and easy. So, meditation or bedtime stories can sometimes be really helpful. It's just sort of teeing your brain up to have a little bit more of a calm experience going into sleep. And then, if you wake up from a nightmare, maybe you're already doing this, but I think like slow, deep, even breaths, we don't give credit. We're like, just breathe. And it always sounds so fucking dismissive and condescending, and I hate it so hard. Also, it helps.
Yeah, if you do it correctly.
Yes.
Really mindfully and intentionally.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like focusing, if nothing else, on just exhaling for longer than you inhale. And also sometimes it can help to do sort of modified body scans, but it's just something to kind of calm your body, slow your body, and kind of get reseated in your body and out of the dream, right? Like out of whatever was going on there. And that might help you drift back to sleep, and have a little bit of an easier time of it. So those would be my things.
Yeah, great. This is the last one.
This is the last one.
This has flown by.
I guess we'll see when we turn off our things. We never know how long they take until we push stop at the end.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, last one for today. So this post says, I went away for my sister's bachelorette party, which I tossed the idea of going or not back and forth because I wasn't sure if I had the strength to use skills. I was all prepared to use skills, just graduating DBT a few weeks ago. And both my parents and therapists kind of said this is going to be the real test of my skills. I was extremely skillful and pulled it off to not ruin anything or upset my sister. My parents were both shocked. They said they were not expecting the weekend to go like that. They usually would get a text or call about me. Instead, when we got home, all three of my sisters told them they thought I had a great time. But when I got home, I burst into tears. I was skillfully exhausted. I thought the point of skills was to reduce suffering. ? And that's how they end the post there, with kind of that question.
Yeah, like
suffering.
So
I'm supposed to feel better, right? That kind of an idea.
Right? I thought this was supposed to help. And so the first thing I thought about, and this is meant so gently, was how did you feel in the moment? Right? Because so many of the skills, like acting skillfully, is meant to reduce suffering in the moment. right? When you're using it. This can be reducing suffering just, intrapersonally in yourself, right? By helping, regulate your emotions, etc. It can also help reduce suffering by, helping you avoid behaviors that would escalate situations in ways that would increase your suffering or the suffering of others. There's can still be, I don't know, some people after things like parties or raves or big concerts or something talk about experiencing drop, right? The sort of crash afterwards, right? Even really good, exciting, happy things can sometimes leave us wrecked if we've been at a kind of emotional high for a while. And even, especially so with skills, especially at first, right? Like on the one hand, you're right. You were super primed for using DBT because it was fresh, but also it was fresh. Like you're not seasoned in using these skills. So the fact that you just finished learning DBT and you kind of threw yourself in at the deep end. So, hey, fucking congratulations that you were able to act that skillfully. And also, like, of course it was exhausting and hard. Like, you were sort of pushing yourself. Almost think of it like running a race, right? You push yourself and push yourself and push yourself and push yourself. And then you collapsed after you got off, past the finish line. That doesn't mean you didn't do a great job running the race, right? That doesn't mean that all of your training was for naught, right? It just meant it was fucking exhausting because it was a lot of really hard work. So that was what I first thought of was, like, how did it feel in the moment? And also, are you suffering in for lack of a better word, in the same way as you used to before behaving skillfully? Or is this a different flavor of struggle that's maybe less suffering and more just kind of being wrecked from the difficulty of things? Which, not to downplay that can still be really rough. But that is probably going to get better over time, right? As you become more and more used to behaving skillfully, as you become more seasoned in your skills, as they become more automatic, they take less effort. I wouldn't expect it to always be this hard. I wouldn't expect you to always end up exhausted after every time you have a prolonged period of using your skills. Give yourself time to grow and to kind of sink into them and into using them. And last but not least, set yourself up for self-care when you get back, when you get home, right? So if you're like, I'm going to go do this thing, it's going to be real fucking hard. So I know I'm not going to want to do stuff when I get back. So I'm going to go shopping before I leave and make sure I have these things in my house. I want to make sure I have my comfort food ready in the freezer so that I can microwave it when I get home or throw it in the oven or something. I want to make sure that I have my, favorite bubble bath on hand so I can draw myself a bubble bath so I can relax and do that thing, right? Sort of set yourself up for self-soothing, for self-compassion when you get back so that you have a soft place to crash land after having such a hard time. So those are my thoughts.
Kate, your thoughts are so good. I love it. Especially the race metaphor of running a race. That's spot on to what's going on here. So I don't know. After listening to you talk, I'm throwing out the notes that I wrote down. and
you're
and
winging
other things are standing out to me. Yeah, okay. About this. Because that idea of just being skillfully exhausted, you mentioned some really great things about, I started to think the same thing too about that drop.
Yep.
After just kind of a big event that, really you were having to be on, quote unquote, for. Yeah. That we could feel depleted afterwards. The other thing that I'm wondering about with this, and again, I didn't write my notes about this at all. Not really. But I'm wondering if part of also why this was so exhausting for this listener is because of the pressure of just graduating DBT a few weeks ago.
Oh, yeah.
Because they say at the beginning, they say both my parents and therapists said this is going to be a real test of my skills. And there can be a different energy. And there was probably both of this at play, but there probably was part of this, like, I'm doing this for me. I'm doing this because I want to have this positive experience this weekend. And I know that using my DBT skills can help me have that. I want to have fun and, relax and enjoy myself and not have there be conflict and chaos. That is probably there. And I also wonder if this additional piece is present too of, and I really didn't want to let people down.
If it's a test, then you can fail.
Yep. I really wanted to prove it to them that I could do this. I want to prove it to my sisters. I want to prove it to my parents. I want to prove it to my therapist. And when that kind of energy is present with something, when we're almost viewing it as a performance, that is going to make it more likely that we're going to be really tired afterwards. It's just, I don't know. I can't explain it any better than that. It's just this added layer of really exerting yourself, honestly. And being scared of that failure, if we're viewing it like a test and that kind of a thing. So I wonder if that's also part of why you kind of had this emotional release afterwards. I also want to super normalize, right? Because I can kind of sense that there's a negative connotation of I got home and I burst into tears. Bursting into tears is this really awful, bad thing. Bursting into tears is one of the healthiest things we can do emotionally.
I'm nodding. Everyone at home can see me nod, I'm sure.
I think we've very much been socialized that there's shame and there's stigma associated with crying.
Yeah.
Good Lord. Let yourself cry for any reason. Any reason. I might have said this at one point on the podcast. I am most likely to cry when I am just at the end of my rope with anger, frustration, anything like that. That's when I tend to cry. I will cry out of sadness, sure, but we cry for all kinds of reasons. And so to come home and to have that emotional release does not indicate failure in any way. That's healthy. You could have come home and done a million other things that might not have been as healthy as crying. Crying is okay.
Yeah, it doesn't have to mean suffering either, really.
Right. Yeah, it's just wow, that was a lot. And now I'm releasing. Because it was a lot.
Yep.
It was a lot to be on for that weekend and to act skillfully for days on end. Because again, I think this is another thing we talk about sometimes, at least in groups we lead with clients. We talk about this with mindfulness skills. We're if you're doing mindfulness for 5 minutes a day, you're killing it. Right? We tell people a lot. We don't expect you to be more or less
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yep, precisely. That's an unrealistic standard. And listener, you essentially did that. But yes, as Kate was saying, takes a lot of work. You're going to be tired after doing that work. That's okay. And as also Kate said, this is why I was Kate, everything good about what you said. Because I love the piece too that you mentioned about how this hopefully does get easier over time.
Yeah. I believe it will.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know, just some of my thoughts there. But
all right.
Yeah.
I think that brings us to the end.
Yes, we're all done.
Of our very long day and our possibly short podcast. Hold on, I have to check. I know it's silly. It's not that short. A little bit short. 38 minutes.
Hey, not bad.
Not bad. Not as fast as it felt, I think. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, so if you would like to be featured in a future Q&A, please feel free to email us, dbtmepodcast@gmail.com, or post in the Facebook group. We do mine a lot of our Q&A material from there as well. So both good ways to reach us, both good ways to get in a Q&A. And yeah, we look forward to our Q&As turning 30 soon.
Yeah. They will be 30 soon. Okay, thanks everybody.
Right. Good night.
To learn more about us and the DBT skills we're teaching each week, join our Facebook group. Simply log in to your Facebook profile and search for DBT Me Podcast.